Good morning. Thank you very much for attending my presentation today, which is titled Sheet Flow to Shallow Concentrated Flow. My name is Doug Williams. I'm a registered professional engineer and also a senior project manager at Enviro Services and Training Center. To start off the presentation, I'd like to discuss the differences between sheet flow and shallow concentrated flow. Sheet flow, exactly as its name implies, is a thin layer or film or sheet of flow that's spread evenly across a surface. This flow is slower in comparison to shallow concentrated flow. So it's not in distinct channels and typically less than about 1 inch or less in depth. In comparison, shallow concentrated flow is greater than 1 inch in depth and typically less than 6 inches. And this deeper flow has higher flow velocities. And this flow velocity has more energy to erode material, causing or leading to real erosion. Sheet flow erosion is relatively low. So it doesn't have, because of the lower or slower flow velocities, it doesn't have as much energy to transport coarser sediment. Rather, it will erode very fine sediment on the surface. Shallow concentrated flow is deeper, higher flow velocities. So those higher flow velocities provide it with more energy to move or erode coarser sediment and transport it downstream and potentially to receiving waters. I want to share a little bit of background about what was done, some work done by others in the past. In starting it off, a big question is, how long is sheet flow going to travel? And this is really important because sheet flow travel time makes up a large percentage of the total time that it takes for flow to reach the uppermost reaches of a watershed to the outlet of that watershed. So because it makes up such a significant portion of time, if we don't adequately estimate that travel length or that travel time, it can lead to poor designs or inadequate designs downstream. So it's really important to try to get that right, the travel time, or estimate it as close as we can to what we'll actually see in the field. So some work done by others. We'll start off with this, and this is just some background information. So I want to kind of build up to what I'll be talking on and share some information and show you how we arrived kind of where we're at now that I'll present later on in this series of slides.
Horton developed this method where he used aerial imagery and a scale, and he summed up the stream lengths for the watershed, and he figured out the area for the watershed. And so using that, he developed an equation. The length of sheet flow is estimated by 1 divided by 2 times the sum of the stream lengths divided by the watershed area. So that's his equation. Based on his studies, he found with his study basins that the average sheet flow length was 92 feet. Then a little bit after, all right, so then a little bit after that, same study, kind of just refined it, trying out some new watersheds. And the only difference with this study is they used topographic maps instead of aerial imagery. They came up with some different numbers, but the equations they use are identical. They just rearrange some of the factors, but it's still the same equation. But they found 197 to 230 feet is the typical sheet flow travel length that they determined from their studies. The main difference between these two are the maps. So it's a lot easier to identify streams and flow paths on with a picture, right, than some topographic lines and contours. So that's the main difference between the two. But all in all, the methods are the same. So that was the beginning. And then if we go to the next one, some additional studies had to do with determining runoff or overland coefficients for sheet flow. So 83 test plots, different varied precipitation ranges. What they found, the main takeaway from that study was that they found that with rougher surfaces or high Manning's N values for overland flow, that it results in excessive depth. So they get out of that shallow, they're in the shallow concentrated flow and not in the sheet flow range of depth. So more than 1 inch. And so that's what they took away from that. And they said, or they concluded that that was the case for lengths up to 300 feet. So sheet flow for 300 feet. So a very long time. So I'll just point that out now. And then later in 86, they concluded the same, that it's more 150 to 300. You still have reasonable depths with these roughness coefficients. So at that time, that was taken forward. Then TR55 came out from NRCS. And then initially, they had limited sheet flow length to 300 feet. Later, they revised it, and what currently is the limit is 100 feet, which is a lot more reasonable in terms of sheet flow travel length. And then we get into the good stuff. So McEwen and Spice, I always mess up. I don't know how to say that name, but that's my best guess. They found that when using sheet flow travel length alone as a limiting factor for the kinematic wave equation, some of those assumptions kind of go out the window. So, and same thing, they found that with rougher surfaces, shallower slopes, you're getting an overestimation of the sheet flow travel lengths. Why is that important, right? So sheet flow, the time it takes for sheet flow to reach the end of its travel length, it makes up a very large percentage of the time of concentration. So overestimating sheet flow travel length will throw off your time of concentration numbers, which then results in, well, it can result in some problems if you have a lower peak that you're designing for. So what they figured out, all in all, that you shouldn't only include sheet flow travel length, but you also need to incorporate the slope and the surface roughness. And so they found that if the roughness coefficient or overland roughness coefficient multiplied by the sheet flow travel length divided by the square root of that slope, I'm sorry that I'm reading off an equation like this, if it's less than or equal to 100, it fit their data really good. So that was kind of what they concluded, is that those factors need to be 100 or less. And then this last study, I really want to highlight this study because I feel like it's a lot of what we all encounter in the field, is we're trying to figure out erosion control and figuring out where to intercept flow before it becomes concentrated and starts rilling out the slope. How do we do that for natural surfaces? So there's kind of if you construct a nice embankment, nice and smooth, dense mat of grass, right? That's not what we see in the field all the time, especially when we're working like in the right of way or something like that. We kind of have what we have. And so for natural surfaces, they came up with 50 feet as the max that they saw in their test plots. So that's, if we take that backwards, that's a cut in half from what NRCS limits with wind TR55. So the main takeaway from that I hope you all kind of remember is that in the field, if you're dealing with natural irregular surfaces, cut it in half, cut the sheet flow travel length in half, and plan for concentrated flow a lot earlier than you would if it's a well manicured and prepared slope. So that's why I plugged that in, and I'll kind of maybe touch on that in a little bit here. So now's the fun part, design equations. Well, really, I kind of want to I want to bring all those studies together and kind of explain to you how things are typically used. Now, a lot of you may be familiar with this, so sorry if I am kind of just repeating stuff you learned in school. If you're not familiar with it, then awesome. I hope you like it. hopefully. But so a real common equation that we use for design is time of concentration. So with the kinematic wave equation, this is the formula. So the time of concentration incorporates those factors of the overland roughness coefficient, the sheet flow travel length, and the slope of that slope, and also the rainfall intensity. So that calculation brings all those into play. And if anybody does want to take pictures, or at the end, if you get my contact info, I will send you the whole presentation. So don't worry. And I'll probably talk your ear off some more too. So you got that to look forward to. So this is the time of concentration formula using the kinematic wave equation. So this is an iterative approach, right? So you're going to go through, you're going to assume some time frame for that time of concentration, and you'll go to an IDF curve, and based on your design storm and that, you'll take the intensity, plug it back into the formula, and see if it equals what you initially guessed for the time of concentration. If it doesn't, go back, choose a new one, and so on and so forth. So that's really common, right? But this is for more, this is hydrology, right? For runoff from a watershed. So yes, we do use that in design, but when I'm dealing more with slope designs and erosion control, there's something else that I actually rely on a lot more, and that's based on McEwen and Spice. I'll get that eventually. So we have a couple things that they concluded was roughness coefficient length divided by square root of slope. That should be less than or equal to 100, right? For sheet flow conditions. So if it's not 100, if it's more than 100, we know we're dealing with shallow concentrated flow, or that's our best guess, because really these are estimates, right? So we could assume we're dealing with shallow concentrated flow. Rearrange those factors, and you come up with this equation to estimate the travel length of sheet flow, which is 100 times the square root of the slope divided by roughness coefficient. So that's how we could try to estimate sheet flow travel length, and when we could start trying to implement other improvements to maybe intercept that flow before it comes concentrated and send it where we want it to go. So those are the main kind of big takeaways from all of this. That's what I really use a lot of. And again, if it's a natural surface, cut it in half. Best thing I could see from all, I don't even know how many sites I've visited, but I've been out there with the wheel measuring, wheel measuring real distances and all that. So there's the one thing that I realize is in all situations when it's kind of natural surfaces, it's far less than what I calculated on a piece of paper. So always cut it in half at least, depending on the roughness. I think even in rougher situations, it shortens a lot more. But these are two that I use to space out interception swales, or to just figure out, what I need to do in terms of shallow concentrated flow and sheet flow. So having said that, I love examples. It kind of really sets things in. So in this first example, real simple, straightforward, right? The question I want to know is, in this situation, should I be considering shallow concentrated flow, or is it just all sheet flow, right? So back to that formula that we had, n times L divided by square root of S should be less than or equal to 100. So we know our slope length, 300. We know our roughness coefficient, 0.41. I think that's like Bermuda grass or something like that. And 0.02 feet per feet, foot per foot of slope. So plug those numbers in and we get to about 870. So in that situation, I mean, we know we need to plan for a shallow concentrated flow. We're not just dealing with sheet flow. So the second example I want to share is, now we know we're dealing with shallow concentrated flow. But if we have these interception swells, like how far should we space them apart? Or a bench road, or however we do it, how far should we space them apart? So then I go back to that same equation, rearrange. You could solve for the length using the slope and the roughness coefficient. So those are the only two things we need. Plug that in, and we see it's 77 feet for sheet flow travel length. All right, right? That's really good, though, to take into the field and to implement in BMPs and design. That's really important because you don't want to just have a big bare slope. You want to make sure rills don't occur because that's when you're going to be moving a lot of sediment, and that's what we're trying to prevent. So, okay, we know how far sheet flow is going to travel on a slope, right? Or we have an estimate. But okay, I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with this. You know, the DOT's right of way is very limited in some senses, and we have to account for upland features or slopes that we can't touch outside of our project area, right? So I was thinking, how do we then kind of back it out and figure out if we have multiple slopes, like, I think this is the next slide. Yeah, okay, it's right. So if we have like a compound slope, different slopes, different surface treatments, how do we estimate where that's going to actually convert into or transition to concentrated flow? Well, if we then consider that the sum of, I know it's a lot of variables and equations, and again, I will send it to all of you guys. So please don't think you need to memorize or think of any of this after this presentation unless you want to. But we could sum up the roughness coefficient, slopes, and lengths for all these slopes, and we sum those up and they should be 100 or less, right? If it's natural surfaces, 50 or less. But if you rearrange those, we could solve for that final length, that final slope length of where we need to plan for that transition to shallow concentrated flow. And I have another example. So example number 3. So 3 different slope sections with varying parameters. The first slope, it's 10 feet wide, so like an unpaved road or something like that. Roughness coefficient of 0.15, slope of 0.02 feet per feet. So that's the first one. Second one, 10 feet, so on and so forth. I mean, you guys can read it too. So if we take those values and we plug it back into the equation, which is shown right there, then we come up with a length for that final slope, and that's 56 feet. So in terms of design, when we're looking at a slope, stabilizing a slope in DOT's right of way, and we have upland area that we have to account for, this is kind of useful for, it really came out of practice for me because I needed a way to figure it out. But this is a useful way to figure out when that transition is going to occur. So 56 feet down the slope, I'm gonna put a berm with a swale or something to capture that flow and send it to some down drain or something like that, a controlled flow path. So, so that was kind of the main intent behind all of this, was how could I do my job in the field and design for erosion control when there's so much upland and outside of our project area that we can't touch. And so that's kind of how this developed. There's still some work that needs to be done. As I go on more and more site visits and do field investigations, I realize, you know, the numbers do vary, and it all has to do with how rough the natural surface is. So that's kind of the next phase, and what I'm getting to next is how to refine that based on the roughness of the natural surface. And using that, I'm hoping to come up with some better estimates. But again, this is a work in progress. The main takeaway I hope everybody learns from this is, if you have a long slope, prepare for rills. Try to capture that flow before rills occur. That's not only going to save money for the project or for the site, for the owner, so they don't have to come back and make some expensive repairs, but more importantly, it's going to reduce the potential for impacts to receiving waters. And I think that's why we're all here today. So hopefully that's the takeaway. And also, when you see interception swells, I mean, they're there for a reason. So don't just move them when you're constructing it. Don't say, we'll put it here. No, we place them, you know, strategically. And so hopefully when you see them in the field, don't alter, don't modify the design, go with it. Hopefully they use this equation. If not, hopefully they have some good data to back it up. But and that wraps up my presentation. I think I'm a little bit early, but my QR code is up there with a nice pretty picture of myself. So you could get out your phones and get my contact info. It should bring up a new contact with all my stuff in there. Save it. This was a lot of information and I get it. So if you have questions after it marinates a little bit, feel free to reach out to me. You know, I'm available. You got my cell there too. So please don't hit me up too late, but you know, everything's there. So please ask me if you have questions about the presentation, ask me for the slides, ask me if you want to take me to lunch or something. That'd be nice too. But no, and I hope this was beneficial for everybody. And I do have references too here at the last slide, but nobody really cares about reading those right now. So, but if you ask for the slides, you'll get that too. So, yeah. Mahalo for the presentation. I appreciate you guys sitting in and ask me any questions right now. Yes. Yes, there were some. Yes. Yeah, some from project sites here and some from project sites on the mainland. So I've done a lot of slope stabilization for landfills all across the country. And so that comes in, that's a really big thing is real erosion at those landfills. So a lot of this work kind of stemmed from that as well. Because we'll typically designing landfill slopes for stability. I look at sheet flow travel lengths so we can intercept it. So typically I'll have an interception swale or we do a bench road and strategically locate that to help with drainage. But yeah, and then some were from here on island and some were, I mean, right, just some unvegetated areas off like Nimitz, I think too. So real shallow slope, but it still shows those rills. And so I thought it was a good example, but. Oh, you wanna, okay, just pass the mic.
Thank you, Doug, for your presentation. Sorry, we're gonna open up the Q&A portion right now to anybody in the audience who has any questions. If we can we repeat your question? Can we have the mic? Just so anybody on Zoom can know what Doug was talking about.
Sorry, I got ahead of myself.
No worries. Yeah.
I asked if your photos were of locations in Hawaii or elsewhere.
And online people, the answer was both. So we'll just leave it at that.
So if anybody in the audience has any questions, again, please raise your hand and we will give you the microphone to ask the speaker your question. We have a question over here.
This is going to be a penetrating and insightful question. I already know it.
Probably not. So I work on utility scale solar facilities all over the US, and this seems to be the biggest thing missing in most of the designs is just simply paying attention to shallow concentrated flow. And so there are no swells, there are no roadside ditches, because it's all sheet flow, right? 1,000 acres, it's all sheet flow.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, have you worked on any solar farms? And if you have, how did you convince the developers that you actually need swells every once in a while?
I have not worked on solar farms. I have done, like I said, a lot of landfill work, and these are like, I mean, 500 acres or something like that on the mainland. So sometimes really big landfills, sometimes just 150 or something like that. So in that sense, it's really, you could just see it. So the slopes are there. There's so many slopes and they're very long slopes. So it's really easy to sit there and say, that's an issue, right? And so they have to get up on the slope and repair it because it's a solid waste facility. So it's a lot easier to convince them that we need swales. But yeah, that's that. But solar farms, I have not. But I'd be happy to try to convince them. I like talking. So, any other questions? Oh, I'm Do I have to repeat? No, okay. I'm bad at the mic and stuff. All right, so no more questions? Okay, so I have a joke. I'm gonna do the joke. All right, I hope you guys like dad jokes, because I'm a dad and my kids think I'm pretty lame, but I'm thinking the crowd here might like this joke, given the subject matter, all right? Trevor's already laughing. I think I told him my joke, but all right. What does stormwater say when it runs off the road? Great. Get it? The inlet, great. Come on, that's a good one, right? All right. Kayla told me one more that I like too. All right. So, when does it rain money? When does it rain money? When there's a change in weather. All right, that's it for me. I'm off the stage. Thank you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Was there any virtual questions? No, okay. So again, thank you, Doug, for your presentation. That now concludes this session. Thank you all for attending. The next sessions will begin at 10:15. Additional refreshments have also been provided in the courtyard. Please be sure to visit any of the vendor booths in room 306 and in the expo tab on Zoom events during the break. Thank you.